I would analogize our situation as being the frog in the slowly boiling water when it comes to privacy. And we have slowly been trading away our information, the tracking of us in different slices over time for convenience.
Game on. Privacy.
Welcome to Game on Privacy, the podcast where we dig into the latest in data privacy, AI risk, and everything in between. This episode is brought to you by Pervani, enterprise-wide automated privacy and AI risk monitoring. No questionnaires, no installs, just answers. I'm joined today by my co-host, Jason Middleton, an award-winning journalist who's been covering Silicon Valley and tech for over 15 years. Jason has hosted broadcasts and podcasts in both the Bay Area and Los Angeles. Our guest today is John Liu, privacy advocate, attorney, co-founder of Pervani, and overall great guy. We'll be diving into the topic data privacy as a fundamental human right. And while that may sound lofty, it's exactly what's at stake. Just look at the headlines. Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings recently donated $50 million to launch a privacy research institute aiming to help academics tackle the murky world of data brokers and data science. If you like what you hear, don't forget to subscribe. New episodes are on the way featuring business leaders and privacy experts from across the industry. Let's get into it.
Thanks for joining me, gentlemen. We're going to break into a deeper conversation about something kind of esoteric but hugely important. That's privacy, information, and artificial intelligence. But first, when I was prepping for this show today to have this conversation with you guys, I couldn't help but notice, but there's a viral video moving around of an emotional support kangaroo. Have you seen this one yet? Because
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's only 10 seconds long. I'll play a couple seconds of it because it's in German. I mean, the kangaroo, it looks like standing next to my dog. So that there's the point of this one is that many people are believing it's real and it's actually AI, and they're actually having to be convinced of this. And this is an example. Okay, look, that's a viral video. I get it. More importantly, Anthropic is an AI company, and the CEO came out yesterday and told Axios they're expecting 15 to 20% unemployment rates for white collar workers, especially at the entry levels. So that's basically where I started my career. So that's a gap that hasn't really been addressed yet. And Anthropic and the CEO and the board are asking for more regulation. And my last one I want to bring up, because this is going to lead right into what we're going to talk about today, and that's the privacy thing, is Reed Hastings. Remember him from the Netflix days, the red envelope days, and then how that studio took over Hollywood. He's concerned with AI and humanity as well. So Reed Hastings, has been added to the board at Anthropic, and also has given his alma mater, he was an 83 graduate of Bowdoin, a $50 million grant to start an AI and humanity study/school. And that ties into what we kind of learned a lesson on with social media and privacy, but it doesn't seem like we really, really learned it. And that's why I wanted to have you guys on here. I don't have $50 million to give to anybody right now, but what I do have is you guys.
I thought you said you did, Jason. What's going on?
If you'll notice, Bill, that check is post-dated. Okay?
Fair.
But that's why I wanted to have you guys on to talk about this, because there's an underpinning, and I know John has a theory about this that we're going to unpack. But Bill, do you think that we learned the lesson we needed to learn from the rollout of social media and its impacts on us, and especially privacy?
Not at all. And we're almost repeating the same thing in a very interesting way. So think of it when social media really started, the essence of how it was introduced. There were a lot of elements that we got of fun, of virality, of videos, of creative posts, of images, of this kangaroo, for example, coming online for this AI, like just fun things that people spread. But the underlying reality of the matter was big business was underneath this, and the business of capturing people's, at the time back then, email addresses, simple location, devices. All of these things went into this ad engine that was feeding this business that continued to grow to billions of dollars and make these large social media companies, juggernauts in the overall global ecosystem of all businesses. I feel like we're getting to that point, or we're starting to see that start in the AI, where we get these videos now where they're fun, they're humorous, and they're going to start spreading. But now we have technology where it's going to get to the point where it's facial recognition. And you're starting to see these different elements where it's bigger, it's more, I'd say, intrusive than just your simple, PI basic information. We're getting a little bit farther down the rabbit hole, if you will, on some of this information, which, as going into the privacy part, is a little daunting.
So we basically traded our entertainment and convenience. We traded our data for, right?
Well, absolutely, yes.
And now we're in a situation where we're trading in a much more table stakes are higher.
And the interesting and scary part is I don't think many people understand that.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Which is why we're talking, right?
Right. This is why. Okay, John, this is a perfect lead in for you. And are we in a fool me twice situation with the privacy thing? Are we taking privacy seriously enough when it comes to AI, from your opinion and from what your company's doing?
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys for having this conversation. It's a really important conversation. I would analogize our situation as being the frog in the slowly boiling water when it comes to privacy. And we have slowly been trading away our information, the tracking of us in different slices over time for convenience. I'm not old, but I'm not young. I remember a time when everything was done in paper. I went to the library to get my library card. I filled out a paper application. I got a paper card. I went to the library and looked up a book using
the Dewey Decimal System
card catalog.
Yeah,
Dewey
still
Decimal,
there,
baby. Got my paper book, went home and read it. Now I go ahead and I check things out through Libby. If I want to go to the library, they're tracking me electronically.
Oh, yeah.
I'll buy stuff off of Amazon on the Kindle, so that a lot of my reading interests are now tracked by Amazon. I use Audible and other third parties audiobook services to find my audio material. I stream music all the time now. So Spotify has all my musical preferences and tastes. My television I think Netflix understands every horror film I've ever watched.
True.
Right. And now I'm trading away certain parts of my financial life, right? Because I'm filing electronically now, and I want to connect my bank account to my accounting system so that I can have those things all uploaded rather than doing it manually. So slowly but surely, we're really trading what was a paper system that we traded away for the convenience of electronics is transforming as we move toward electronic systems as the norm and paper now as the exception. Mm-hmm. And now you have artificial intelligence coming on the scene with all these disparate individual slices of my information now being fed into artificial intelligence. We don't even know where that's going. It's going, the goal is artificial general intelligence, AGI, where AI is at least as good as human reasoning, if not better. And it's a very, very slippery slope. I think the water is going to start boiling very soon. Yeah. And we take a moment and pause and sit down and think about how we want to handle this. And I think having conversations around this is really important. Well, because I think people forget that about privacy as a fundamental precondition to our freedom. We've been so used to it for so long in our lives. We are a nation born of individualists. Go West, young man. Silicon Valley. I don't care how you're doing this stuff. It's dumb. It's broken. It's paper. We're going to change it. I may have to go ahead and compete against Fortune 500 companies in areas that they've never seen before, but I can do it. That kind of individuality, that kind of knowledge, that kind of go-to-itness, and that kind of spirit is really driven on this fact that we know things about ourselves, about our communities that nobody else knows. Well, and we have that, and there's, and there are times when we get really private and we want to have our private downtime. And now it's, it's going to be harder and harder to even have those moments. I remember watching. I'm a big fan of Eurovision, and so it birthed ABBA. It birthed a lot of great bands. Last year or the year before, there was a really interesting digital privacy moment. This guy named Juiced, who was projected to be the leader to win Eurovision, had a wonderful song. He had negotiated with Eurovision that this was going to be a very personal song. It was going to be about the death of his, it was inspired by the death of his parents. It was a very personal thing. He had negotiated privacy rights. He had said to them, right after I finish my song, please don't record me. I need time because I'm going to open myself up. This is a very vulnerable time. They ignored it. The camera person went in. They zoomed totally in. He made some sort of gesture like stop. The camera person read that as aggressive. A complaint was filed. He was sanctioned and disqualified.
Oh.
He was disqualified out of Eurovision. I think a year and a half later, they finally went through all the sort of due process and the hearings, found completely innocent. Not a shred of evidence to indicate his threatening moves, right? And this was a he said, she said. The cost was disproportionate. He had negotiated his privacy rights. He had put it in contract. They ignored it, and then they kicked him out. And Eurovision is really important because the winners of Eurovision often become superstars.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and that's, absolutely.
When you win Eurovision, you become a global music phenomenon, right? And he ended up losing his chance. The winner of Eurovision that year won because he got kicked out. It's really interesting, right?
I think this is good. I want to back up a little bit. And I think the conversation really, when we get to AI, we're talking really about, we talked about getting to Silicon Valley and kind of glorifying entrepreneurs and big business and how we get there. And really the rise of, I think business heading into kind of creative outlets to disrupt large existing infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask a hypothetical, and I want either one of you to kind of weigh in. If, say, there was a world where AI never existed, right? That we didn't have this big opportunity to have this machine learning cognitive ability, would this world of entrepreneurs, forward thinking, where we hit a ceiling, would this be an issue?
I think the water would boil slower, but it would still boil over time.
But it would still boil, right? Yeah. Because I think it's an interesting thing in my head, because when we're talking about this, and we're talking about, and John, you made an interesting point of Spotify and your financials, they're all separate buckets. But I think one of the issues that we're raising is these buckets with the computing power and AI are going to start kind of meshing.
I think, there's an educational thing here, right? Because privacy is an esoteric thing. It doesn't, it's an imagination, it's an idea, and so is freedom, right? And these two things are tying together. That's
exactly
kind of John's point. And it seems to me that educating, I need to make, as far as a consumer, which the U.S. is filled with, pro-level consumers. We need to put data at the checklist of what we care about whenever we're making a transaction. And it just has to become rote. It has to become part of our daily practice, right? And it's not, this conversation that we're having right now is trying to get to that, but it's not happening anywhere else. Everybody's freaking out about the robots taking over the world. Okay, that's great, but what if they just take over my bank account? What if they just trick me with an emotional support, kangaroo that looks real?
Maybe I need one of those, but that's different.
There's a Venn diagram here.
Absolutely.
Of data. My data sets are living, like John said, banking, entertainment, music. Let's just take those three. And then, so those Venn diagrams are overlapping in places that I have no idea. I can't even imagine how these things are being overlaid.
And there's a real conversation in the privacy world, and this is where John can weigh in as well, where the definition of personal information, so PI and then PII, what actually the intersection is, right? Where does that actually hit? And that's an ongoing debate.
So PI is personal information.
So let's John could go into it, because there's
PI and PII for me, John. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So personal information is just this general concept of what is information that's tied to you as a person. Right. There's personally identifiable information. That's PII. And that's a legal term that talks about the types of information that commercially is collected from somebody that can identify them for the purposes of completing a business transaction. And typically it's tied to online collection and online commercial transactions. If we go to Walgreens and we buy we buy a candy bar, a candy bar, and we go to the cashier and we go ahead and we pay them $2 for the candy bar. That's a transaction that's commercial. No PII has been obtained. But then you go there again and you go and you buy your prescription medicine. Say I've got hay fever, so I go buy my allergy medicines there. I then now go to a different counter. I provide my ID card, my medical, my reimbursement, whatever, my healthcare card. I then provide my credit card, and then that transaction's collected, right? And they've collected all this information, right? My name. They now understand the medicine I need. They have my credit card. There's all that information, the address, because they need to usually typically confirm you're the right person. So that those pieces of electronic information are now being collected and stored in systems to complete that commercial transaction. That's PII.
Okay. And a lot of that, I've shared 3 sets of data. I didn't even realize I was just picking up my Claritin.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. So, and the idea of what you're driving at is that the more of that's out there is the higher the awareness needs to be around who's protecting this. Okay, this is a good one. You mentioned Eurovision. Let's go back to Europe. Let's go back to the EU. Now, back in the day, GDPR came out. And there's links in the show notes below if you need to refresh on GDPR. But it seems like the EU is a little bit ahead on the regulation thing. Are they looking at it the right way, or are we 2 steps behind and need to have this privacy conversation first before we could talk about regulation? Which is why Reed's giving $50 million to schools and stuff.
Yeah, I think I'm a big believer in America being a tremendous lab of democracy, and that we've got 51, we've got the federal government and our 50 states. In that same way, I think the privacy development lab of the world is growing, right? And we've got Europe leading one perspective, which I think is the leader in the thought process of what is inalienable for a human being to have. I think the United States has 51 different ways of looking at it. I'm partial to California, so I think California is very aligned with a forward-thinking concept of what is a person's inalienable right, and what they have consequently they have the right to keep private. Because I think that your right to do something is also the right to be forgotten, or the right for it not to be used.
All right. Okay, cool. So I don't want to get into the regulation weeds because we're having a different, but we needed that framework, and that was me. I just needed that framework. I'm glad. Luckily, it seems the trend is EU does something, California follows up with something a little bit tighter, and then other states are like, well, California does it, so that's what we'll kind of copy. So maybe we'll go down that road, and if you think that's good, that's good. But who are those regulations pointed at? It's not pointed at me. It's pointing at data brokers, right? And this is a phrase that I don't think a lot of people are familiar with, data brokers. So how do these data brokers use all these Venn diagrams and overlapping information, and why is it a concern, and why do we need the regulation, John?
Well, so when you're in the business of so obviously everyone understands business, everyone has a position and perspective on business, everyone's worked for a business or may have owned a business, right? Businesses are trying to make sales. And when sales, and the fundamental concept of selling is, if I understand my customer or my customer group better, I'll be able to better hit them at the right time. Right. And then advertising comes in and says, well, we need to go ahead and develop brands. So Coca-Cola is excellent, right? You see Coca-Cola ads everywhere. And when you want a soft beverage, Coca is going to be one of those ones that comes into your mind. And the strategy to understand who I am as a consumer and who you are, and how we together as a group work, is really based on collecting information, right? And the more information that they collect, the better they're able to understand us and target our needs. And so a lot of companies have a data collection strategy where they collect whatever data they need that, at that time of transaction. And once they collect it, they want to know more. And so they enrich the data they've collected by going to data brokers. And data brokers are massive amounts of information. I'm sure Spotify has a massive amount of information on my listening habits. So they may realize that John is the kind of guy that likes jazz. So maybe we're going to start, people who like jazz, who live in California, may like healthy foods, or they may like beverages that jazz aficionados like. So maybe they're not going to be beer drinkers. Maybe they're going to be more like wine drinkers or hard liquor drinkers, right? Or, that kind of thing. And they enrich they get these additional data from data brokers to get with this enriched strategy. They get a better understanding of a profile of their target consumer. And then from there, they can build models and they can figure out how to advertise more directly to you at the times that you're open to being sold to.
So they're enriching data sets. They're adding data sets to enrich it and extrapolate potential or highly targeted outcomes for themselves.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Because that's from the marketing perspective, I could weigh in. It's really interesting because as a marketer or advertiser, either side, you're trying to maximize your dollar, but and try to get the best outcome for your client, right, or your consumer. And that is the best way to do that is to fully understand their exact habit, right? And to do that, you want to get the biggest data set possible, which is what John was mentioning, right? Mm-hmm. You want to understand their exact behavior. So, John goes biking on a Tuesday, right? He's really thirsty. Okay, well, and he's going to pass by a grocery store. I mean, like just all this exact stuff that literally happens. Now, I remember having a conversation with someone at South by Southwest at a large social media network that would be nameless, and they were just rolling out some of this technology and having a conversation with one of the biz dev people, and it was very interesting where they said when you plug in your headphones into the phone, they know that the headphones are in. When you are running, they know your heart rate is elevated. When you're listening to music, they know. So like it's quite literally that example of I'm running by a grocery store and my heart rate is elevated. They could give an ad for Gatorade. I mean, that is a real world example that can happen.
Right.
That is the type of thing that, fast forward, that is the data set, and those are the data sets that are going to continue to go into bigger examples.
Okay.
And all this large AI and enriching information is going to happen.
In that example, I'm running past the drugstore. They're going to give me aspirin because I'm probably having a heart attack.
Hopefully not.
It sounds like, but it sounds like, okay, so that data you're talking about and overlapping it and extrapolating a possible outcome,
right.
That sounds valuable.
They don't
have that value without my data.
Right.
So how do I have agency over my data? I mean, do I have any agency left?
Well,
and this might be for John, for both of you, because I know from your perspective, you need that data necessarily. And I think from John's perspective, he's trying to help me understand that I can have agency, or if California laws, let's use California's regulations for, right to be forgotten.
Yeah. And it's an interesting way to look at, there's a couple ways to look at it, and I'll tackle one way, and a couple ways that business is actually trying to self-regulate, but I don't think it's going fast enough. One way is through a lot of browsers and technology now are allowing consumers to opt out of tracking and opt out of being followed, right? And this is a lot of the kind of legacy regulation, right? Opt out of cookies, opt out of private, like the kind of not original privacy policies or privacy tracking, but some of the kind of fundamental privacy issues, right? So when you do that on a browser level or on a device level, you're not going silent with your information, but it's a start, right? And what it does for the ad world and for the marketing world is it sort of puts it in a bit of a peril where you're not getting that full puzzle to start with. So what you end up doing is you end up almost going back to pre-tracking days where you really almost have to rely on a little bit of gut, a little bit of intuition, almost like the old school. And I have my gray hair here, so I could say back when I used to do ads, you had to rely on genuine creativity and actual user testing and usability, where you would go and have rooms of people and say, which one do you like, and put it out there and see where the funnel comes, like what comes in on the other side. So it's not there yet, and it's not going to be there. But anyways, the reason why I bring this up is there are some gaps here, but it'll be interesting to see, again, given the speed and acceleration of AI, if that disruption just blows past that, right?
I see. John, does that ping on your radar? Do you have a take?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this stuff is so interesting I'm a privacy wonk, so it's interesting to guys like me. But
Great. Glad you're here.
Other people may have different words than the word interesting. So really the concept here, right, is going back to freedom is, if that's my data and I want it to be my data again, I need to somehow be able to say, you can't use it. I have to exert some sort, just going back to basic ownership concepts, right?
Right.
If you're living in a surveillance state, it's a different story, right? At that point, the rights of your rights of freedom and your location and your activities in a surveillance state are not yours, right? I mean, it's a surveillance state. So in this hypothetical surveillance situation, freedom is different than in a situation where you're like, well, I'm really free and I choose not to be surveilled. And therefore, I choose to be able to have things turned on and off when I want. And when they are turned on, I need to be able to say, you can only turn on these particular aspects when I want them to be turned on, only for these purposes. So if I choose to use if the cost of using a credit card is that they will track where I've been because I have to actually put the card in, and they track what I bought because I have to tell them what I bought, and I have to tell them the amount. Okay, at that point in time, I use the credit card, I turn it on. But at that point in time, I need to complete that transaction. I'm giving it to you. That's one thing where I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I have I need the convenience of buying this electronically. I don't have enough cash, or I'm buying something that's not easily to use cash. I mean, cash is not the right form to use. So that's useful. But and I'm okay with that. But what happens when they do this over the course of my life? And can they hold that forever? Or should there be some finite time? Like, what is the usefulness of my buying pattern to a seller of data? It's very useful. But is that the deal that I made when I stuck my credit card in? I mean,
Yeah.
to buy you guys dinner, is the quid pro quo that you get to know that for 2025 I bought this much dinner? Or is the answer that, or is it more along the lines of what they'd like to see, which is I get to know John's buying habit forever as long as he's using credit cards, period.
Right. Well, thank you for buying us dinner tonight, by the way, John.
Yeah, thanks.
That's very nice.
Absolutely.
Invitation accepted. Yeah, that's right. Because that it seems like the terms have changed, right? But they didn't change. Yeah, because that's a great example of that. Is fiat currency and being able to track things. But okay, let's now agency. You said clawing it back. So obviously, designed obsolescence. I'm thinking about, like, it's easy to make 1 billion Hermes bags, but they don't. They make 100,000 and then they sell. Okay, so
Right.
Should I be charging for my data?
I think the answer is you should be, right? I mean, we should be thinking of. Well, okay, let me take a step back.
Yeah.
So, couple of sort of background concepts, right? So, one of the things that we really need to think about is, how long can businesses properly retain the data that we're giving them, right? There's this concept of just record retention. Does it make sense that in buying you guys dinner, the retention rate should be indefinite? They can store that forever. Or is there some more reasonable, like, if the answer is your job is Visa, your job is to make sure things are, you want to make sure that it is me, and you want to make sure that there are protections in place so that people can't commit fraud. Maybe there's some information you want to keep longer. For instance, maybe you want to make sure that you have my cell phone for as long as I have the credit card. So you can ping me and say, hey, John, is this what you bought?
Right.
They may want to know, obviously they need to know your address so they can send you the credit card bill. And for as long as that, as long as I hold that credit card, right? The buying, but what I bought and where I bought it at, do they need it for the rest of my life, or do they just need it for that period of time that I have my credit card? And this is assuming this is the longest, right? They maybe don't need it even that long, because I may use the same credit card for my whole life, but maybe and they only need it for 2 or 3 years, whatever is reasonably necessary to confirm that the services that they provided to me are done, and that it was me that actually used them.
Well, it's clearly valuable because that is server space. So one transaction, I mean, you could just exponentially multiply that for every transaction across the world for every credit card company, right? That is a lot of server space that is sitting, and that costs money. So if you are a credit card company, whatever, it's the cost, your expense is here, but then the benefit is going to be significantly higher. So they're clearly making money off of this data, right? The question is, to your point on the privacy side, which is, I think, the exact question is like, in the privacy world, how long should they keep it?
Right, because John just said 2 or 3 years, and I'm thinking in my head, what if I want that transaction expunged in 2 to 3 seconds? Right. I should be the one paying, I guess, at that point for that convenience, right, for that assurance. But I have to have trust. I still have to go back to ethics and trust, and to think that my Visa card is going to expunge that transaction and not overlay it in 2 or 3 seconds because I opted for a box that doesn't exist yet, but maybe it should.
Yeah, and
this goes back to the whole payment aspect, right? A lot of this goes toward aligning of incentives, right? Now that when data collection was siloed and sort of processed in accordance with that silo, I think you could live with things in a certain way. But now that now that you have brokers and enrichment, and these silos aren't individual silos, they're starting to become massively siloed and owned by a handful of companies across the world. Mm-hmm. When you add that warehousing of sorts to the fact that artificial intelligence is coming on board, and that level of profiling, and because right now we're talking only about, we've only looked at transactional data. What about thought data? What about your actual expression data through social media? What about all your tweets? The echo chambers that create this record of thoughts that may be real, they may be kind of posturing, they may be deliberately antagonistic because but you won't know the context, but AI may not understand the context, but they're starting to record all this stuff. You've got your YouTube shorts, you've got all this video. Now you've got a massive amount of information that's being coalesced and harmonized in a single software application called artificial intelligence, which now can mash it together. And if they hit AGI, they've got a thing where all this information now is permanently resonant in a software that is at least as smart as a human being in terms of cognition.
Voice, voice, facial expressions.
We haven't even talked about those people who did 23andMe, where they have the genetic information as well, right?
Yeah, that one freaked me out. I opted out of doing 23andMe, but most of my family members did it. And I did one for my dog. Came back 99% golden retriever. Like, I knew that already. I don't know why I paid $100 and whatever for it. But yeah, okay, so I opted out of doing 23andMe, right? But a lot of people did, and now 23andMe is an entity that I guess that's an insurance.
That's a mess in and of itself, right? Because they went bankrupt.
Yeah. There was some risk, and then it became something else.
They can sell it, right? And so there's a window where there's a window under which you can delete it, right? But if you go out of that window, then it's presumptively that you've opted in for your information to be sold, which I think is crazy because I don't think anybody. I mean, I don't think anybody would opt into being sold. I think it's just that people who haven't done it yet aren't aware of it, or the opt out mechanisms, or the don't sell my information, do not sell share is too hard to use.
Right.
People are either not aware, or it's too hard to use, or both. Right.
Or there's 12, or there's 12 inputs coming, like there's 23 new, and then there's 15 other ones we have to manage too, which brings us back to why regulation has to exist or should exist for people to catch up with it. But like, anyway, so, well, and no, not anyway, because if we go back to regulation, John's point was there's 51 possible layers that have to be adhered to. Would we be better off having 51 layers of different, like 50 states having different things, and that would force companies to be more transparent when it comes to what they're doing the data with? Or are we way far from that? I mean, we've had a guest on recently who said that he does not see or anticipate a federal level kind of thing coming in across the industry, because I don't think the feds can figure it out fast enough. Do you think that we need all that protection?
I think in some ways so as the water begins to boil, people are going to think about what sitting in boiling water means for them.
Yep.
Right. And so I think more perspectives on this, the better. And so I think, because I just think that to have one federal law to cover every single corner case for every single concerned citizen of every state is just not going to work. We all universally are aligned toward protecting our children, right? I think that's the only place where we're 100% unified. Like, don't mind my children. Don't take advantage of my children. They do it all the time. I mean, right? Video games are addictive. They're designed to be addictive, right? You have this game enrichment experiences to buy extra armament, better skins. You can buy cheat codes to invent. I mean, there are all these things that are already being used, these strategies to get information and commerce out of our children.
Well, I know some adults that do it too, but I get your point.
Exactly. I mean, one would argue at least the adults are adults, right?
Sure. But I see where you're going.
You're right. But so I think, other than our children, I think it'd be very hard for us all to align as to what would be the appropriate level of protection for us as adults. So I think 51 different laboratories is a good idea. I think the EU works well because I think they ended up all taking the same place where they said, I want the highest standard. It's easier to have one regulating body if the answer is, I want the highest possible standard known to man, right? Then that makes a lot of sense.
And let's be honest, the EU is not doing that out of the goodness of its heart. It's doing it because the Americans are innovating, and economically speaking, they need time to catch up. So if they put down the big, heavy regulations on there, then it gives their companies time to catch up. And I think we talked about France in another episode, or we're going to talk about it in a future episode about how France was focused on this. The EU is an economic bloc. It's doing that for economic reasons. So I know where you're coming from, but I also know that we're up against time a little bit, but we're going to continue this conversation in another show, another segment, because I think raising the awareness around it. Look, it seems like conspiracy theories back in the day, 25 years ago, were filling in the gaps where knowledge is. Now we have a little bit more knowledge, and we're not talking about tinfoil hat stuff. We're talking about everyday lives and transactions and data brokerage. And I think that we have to continue this for literacy purposes alone. Plus, I find it entertaining. But is there anything I didn't get around to asking that any of you would like to close with? And just knowing that we're going to come back in another episode for this, Bill, was there something that we didn't get to extrapolate on that you wanted to dwell on?
No, I think we covered a really good chunk, and I think we set the stage for future conversations, because this is an ongoing debate, both in consumer business world and really what I think we could have a follow-up conversation with is where this is headed, right? What that future could possibly look like, what that Jetsons future will look like, right? Like down the line. We didn't really touch on that, so that could be a next kind of version, next episode. I think that would be a really fun one to follow up on. I think that's
coming faster than we may think.
We had
2 decades to get used to Facebook and TikTok. we don't necessarily have that much time with AI, I don't think.
No, I mean, with the whole John Ivy purchase, billions of dollars, like who knows what that next form factor is and how fast
They're putting, let's face it, they're putting it in our refrigerators, right?
it's going to be everywhere. Yeah.
We're going to have AI nanos, and I'm going to have to unbox those in 15
Oh
minutes.
my gosh. I know,
John,
right?
Is there anything you wanted to dwell on that we didn't stick around on long enough, or do you want to save it for the next episode?
I'm happy to. I'm passionate about this. I could talk. I could talk forever on this. But I think what we've done is a really good job of addressing sort of the fund. See, privacy is such a hard concept because it is an idea. It's just it's like freedom is an idea. We know it, we feel it, but it's very hard to talk about it. Right. And I think we need to have these conversations because the frontier of the border between privacy and freedom are the same now. We're getting to the point where if you don't have privacy, I don't know if you have freedom because somebody else knows. They'll know how much you're worth. They'll know who you're married to or who your children are. They'll know how much they're worth. They'll know their buying patterns. I mean, there's all these things that are coming up in the next. I mean, one could argue they're already here, but when you add artificial intelligence and taking that data and taking all these data feeds and bringing them to one piece of software that can almost, whose goal is to hit AGI, you're going to have a 24/7 machine that never sleeps, that never needs to get sick, that never needs benefits, to always think about you and how to sell to you and whatever else that wants to be done to that the buyer of this machine or the owner of this machine would like this machine to cogitate on.
I like that. We got okay. For my placeholder is going to be the generational thing that John brought up. It may be too late. My ship has sailed as far as my personal data because I'm of a certain age. But my kids, maybe there's ways to put protections in place before they come and make the same kind of blindfolded mistakes that I've been making for the last 25 years or so. Gentlemen, thank you both for your time. Let's keep this going. Okay, we'll talk again soon. And John, real quick, thank you for giving me right there at the very end the promotional soundbite I need. Privacy as freedom. That's going to work. That's our title for this one.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Gentlemen. All right.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of Game on Privacy, where the right to privacy meets the reality of AI. A special thanks to our guest, John Liu, for unpacking why privacy isn't just a compliance checkbox, it's a human right. From the erosion of privacy masked as convenience to the growing power of data brokers and ethical implications of AI, this conversation reminded us what's really at stake in the digital age: freedom, agency, and identity. If this episode got you thinking, help spread the word. Share it with your network or leave a quick rating wherever you get your podcasts. Check the show notes for key quotes and highlights. Until next time, I'm Bill Porter, joined by Jason Middleton. And remember, privacy isn't passé, it's power. Keep the conversation going because it's still game on.